Okay, so this is about the stamps of Vichy France, the colonial stamps, that is to say, not metropolitan France itself. The reason I got going on this is because I read a lot of stuff on this, and the literature generally says that you won't get many of these Vichy colonial stamps in used condition. Certainly, that's the case with me. I have a lot of these things, but very few actually used copies. And in a case like this, the used copies are much more desirable than the ones that were just printed and then put on a shelf someplace. So that is Marshal Pétain, who was the head of state for Vichy at the beginning of the this period. So let's look at Scott's policy on this. Until 2004, the Scott catalog only listed a few of these stamps in used condition. In fact, they didn't list a lot of these stamps at all because they were in the category produced but never received at the place they were supposed to be used. But in 2004, because of inconsistencies with the way the catalog handled these stamps from 24 of the French colonies, they decided to put them all in, and they get Scott numbers. For some people, that's important. For me, I think Scott is a great catalog, but I certainly am not a slavish follower of what they do. This is a quote from the Scott catalog. This is from the front of the catalog. So on the left of this slide, you can see that there are no used quotations for these stamps of French Guinea. There are quotes for unused copies, but the note at the bottom says they were not placed on sale in French Guinea. They were not because they never got there. If you look to the right, these stamp, this is where now? Oh, that's French Guinea as well. You'll see the difference. In this case, the catalog has a quote for the unused copies, and then it has two dashes next to it. What that means is the catalog acknowledges that there are some used stamps out there, but that they're so few in number that giving them a price is really impossible. It's somewhat comparable to when you see an italic quote in the Scott catalog for a very valuable stamp, and all they will do, if they can, is put in a quote for the last time that stamp exchanged hands and is known about publicly.
The italics really means that it also means that if you're looking at a stamp of this type, you should have it expertise, because the things are not normal, and there are a lot of fake cancellations, for example.
Oh, okay, good.
I would think that in the case of these Vichy government stamps as well, there might be a problem in authenticating cancellations. You might have a cancellation and it's impossible to know whether it's something that was in period or not. And that might be another reason for leaving a price out.
Stamps in italics generally refer to items that are difficult to value accurately.
Okay. Yeah, because they could be few in number. And as you say, the cancellations could be dubious in this case.
And it says for inexpensive items, a value in italics represents a warning. One example is a, quote, blocked, unquote, issue, where the issuing postal administration may have controlled one stamp in a set in an attempt to make the whole set more valuable. Another example is an item that is sold at an extreme multiple of face value in the marketplace at the time of its issue. So it's difficult to value.
Very good. That's a very useful contribution. In fact, one country that was notorious for holding back one value was East Germany.
Huh.
And you will see a lot of those in italic.
Hmm.
There'll be a set of, say, 8 stamps, each of them going for 45 cents or something like that, one going for $14 for no real reason at all, except that the government limited how many there were. Well, anyway, I just wanted to point out the difference in the catalog. If they give no quote whatsoever, that means that there are no known used copies in this case. If there's a dash, it means that there are believed to be some known copies. What about these stamps? What distinguishes them from earlier French colonial stamps? Well, one thing is that they do not carry the initials RF for République Française. A few early ones did. I suspect that's because the plates were already made up and maybe the Vichy government thought it was some kind of a republic. If it was only for a few months, believe me. So here's an example from Saint-Pierre and Miquelon with no RF on it. In fact, the inscription is simply Poste Aérienne Française. Whereas earlier colonial stamps would always have the RF on it. There were several series issued. The first one is known as the Pétain design because the head of state, Marshal Pétain of Vichy, is inserted in the corner of all these stamps. There were quite a few of these. The sets tend to be fairly long. I can't give an accurate number, maybe 70 or 100 or something like that. These stamps did reach some of the colonies, in particular equatorial Africa. That is because there was a land connection through Tunisia and Algeria and French Morocco early in the war, going down to French equatorial Africa. The Allies, of course, did not invade North Africa until November, I think it was, of 1942. And they weren't completely successful until, I believe, it's the summer of 43. So that link between France and Vichy, of course, was the southern part of France, the Mediterranean, and the protectorates, the French protectorates in North Africa, was complete until sometime in 1943. So this set you will find in used condition. But as I say, I ain't got them. I'd love to, but I don't. This is the next issue later in 1941. These did not get out of France, so you will not find these used. You will see them here overprinted. That is a whole separate issue, and I'm not going to get involved in the stamps of Indochina because it is really a quagmire for the simple reason that it was a different war. That was the Pacific War, and the countries that were taken over by Japan were also allied at times with Thailand and things like that. There were factions left and right, and whereas the French colonies remained at the beginning loyal to the Vichy government. Of course they did. There was no other French government. They weren't going to be loyal to the German north of France, and de Gaulle and Leclerc and the other heroes of the Free French had not yet organized a credible army and a credible threat to German militarism. So this set you will not find used. Once again, notice that there's no RF on these things here. It's simply called post. The next issue was semi-postal. This was in 1942. Some of these, again, made it to West Africa. That's because it was still 42. The Allies had not yet landed in North Africa for most of that period. I do not have a copy from the colonies. So on the left, I'm showing a copy of the Secours National issue from France proper. And on the right, again, I can't get one. These stamps are from 1931, but they were overprinted in 1942.
the RF on the French stamp.
Yes, there is. That was early enough that I guess Vichy still was pretending it was a legitimate republic. It would soon become nothing but a puppet state of Germany. Another issue came out, and this was for sale in France. A few did make it to the colonies. This one here is Equatorial Africa, and of course it's not used. And the theme of this was protection of children, protection of native children. You get the feeling after a while that the people in France knew that these things were not by and large going to make it to the colonies, but there were going to be a small number of collectors who would willingly pay the surcharge on these semi-postal stamps. So there was also an airmail issue, and 8 Western African colonies got this. This is another example of stamps that do exist. So some of my theme here is that when you hear that these stamps don't exist in used condition, well, many of them do. The vast majority do not, but many of them do. Overprints abound for these issues, whether used copies are available of an individual overprint varies from place to place. Overprints, of course, are the most dubious sort of philatelic material that there is, in my opinion, anyway. Meanwhile, as I said, by late 1943, Vichy had lost control of all the overseas colonies. And that includes the very important places of Algeria and Tunisia, where the Allied armies had chased the Germans and the Italians over into Sicily and finally onto the peninsula of Italy itself. Again, once again, with overprints, the quick and easy way is to stamp it France Libre, Free France. Here's some examples of that. These stamps were later, I believe these are lithographed. These are examples of the more official France Libre stamps, undoubtedly printed, well, not undoubtedly, but maybe in Britain, although you don't see many lithograph stamps from Britain, do you? So I don't know exactly where these were made. But I find this, generally speaking, if someone says, I got 2 stamps, one's engraved and one's lithographed, without even looking at it, I'll say, give me the engraved stamp. It's going to be prettier. I think these are terrific stamps. Well, the war finally ends, and in recognition of the significant contribution that colonial peoples had made to the Allied victory, France and some of the colonies were able to issue commemoratives thanking people. The one on the left, Wallace and Futuna, and the one on the right is recounting I believe it's the army of General Leclerc, who led many, many colonials in important battles, and they took significant casualties too. Sort of summing up here, to some extent, there really are hundreds of these Vichy colonial stamps because they were issued in large sets by and large. But only a small portion are actually used. If I had to guess what percent of extant copies of these stamps are available used, I would say well under 1%. And they are highly sought after by collectors of French colonial stamps.
This cover raises an interesting issue. It's sent to Geneva, Switzerland.
Yes.
Did the only places that could send correspondence to Switzerland were German-occupied territories or Free France or France?
Germany during the war, at least in the West, made a great pretense of being some kind of civilized society. And they let, for instance, packages go through to prisoners of war. This letter was sent to the Red Cross in Geneva.
Well,
So
we
that,
sent from Tunisia, which I don't know, the 1942 is this, I see.
yeah, it's
So the Vichy government still had control of Algeria then. So
yes, yes, it
the
did.
Germans might have allowed mail to transit France to get to Switzerland, but if you were British and had to correspond with someone in Switzerland, I guess that didn't happen during the war.
Right. I noticed that when I saw this thing, it doesn't seem to be, maybe it's on the other side, doesn't seem to have been censored, opened, and read. So I don't know what the exact story is here. So very quickly now, wrapping this thing up, it occurred to me there are these hundreds of stamps for the 24 colonies that participated in these various series issued by the Vichy government. But what about the two other European colonies, European powers that had colonies and were overrun by the Germans? What did they do during the war? And it's really quite different. You get quite a contrast. For instance, Belgium, Scott lists only 42 stamps, and all but three of those are in two long series of stamps. And the reason there are two is because the Belgians, being a bilingual people, always feel they have to, at the time anyway, felt they had to put first would be French, and then they have to reissue the stamp and put first will be Flemish. So actually, it's only 21, about 19 stamps that are different. One reason for that is, of course, that there really was no government in Belgium, and there was very little connection. What surprises me about these stamps is that in the catalog, these stamps are valued both unused and used, and they're commons. They're like 35-cent stamps. I don't understand how that many Belgian Congo stamps could have been used under these circumstances. Who was writing to whom? I don't know. I really don't know.
Those
So,
could well be favor cancels, but now the cancellations may not really indicate that the stamps traveled and did actual postal service. Nevertheless, they are canceled, and the number of them is known, and the value, therefore, the value can be determined with precision.
I never mentioned the numbers of stamps that were issued by the Vichy government in various emissions. Generally speaking, they were not particularly high, in the range of 40 to 80,000 copies. But what was the demand for these stamps? Probably very, very low. I can't imagine many stamps being used in Togo in 1941. So I don't know. Meanwhile, the Netherlands, what did they do? Well, there are only 9 entries in Scott after 1941 when what becomes Indonesia is taken over by the Japanese. And in fact, one of the reasons I'm avoiding the Pacific area is that you can see here the Japanese issued the stamps. They were not issued with any connection whatsoever to the Netherlands. In fact, there was already a great movement in what is now Indonesia for independence. And the people, by and large, were just delighted that the Dutch were gone. And they never came back. They just didn't. In fact, at the end of the war, this is truth is stranger than fiction. At the end of the war, some of the occupying Japanese troops in Indonesia were recruited as policemen to keep law and order in Indonesia. Go figure. But amazing. So that's it. There are 2 terrific articles, and you can get them online pretty easily. The 2 that really impressed me, one is from a group called the France and Colonies Philatelist. Unfortunately, it is not dated. I printed it out, but I haven't got a date on it. From the typeface and so on. And from this little clue, it's edited by Ira Zweifach, 336 Central Park West, New York, 25, New York. That's pre-zip code. So this goes way back. It's a wonderful article. Unfortunately, online, only half of it is available. It says to be continued, and it ain't, as far as I can tell. The other is one called Postal History of an Empire in Decline. It's from the military PHS org. I don't know what PHS stands for. But in any case, that is a terrific article because, among other things, as the war progressed, colony after colony switched allegiance from Vichy to the Free French. And by the end of 1943, Vichy had control over nothing, absolutely nothing. It's a wonderful article. It's really detailed. Somebody put in years of work on it.
Yeah.
I'm cribbing from it. I freely admit it.
Roger, do you know how successful the Allies were in blocking transportation between the French colonies and France in the Mediterranean early in the war? Were they able to get mail through for a long time?
They got mail through. I will have an example coming later, but they were very successful. The problem early in the war was that the French had put a large part of their fleet at a place called Mers el-Kébir in Algeria. This was a man-made harbor. The coast of Algeria is not given to natural harbors the way many other places are. And because of fear that when Vichy France signed the armistice with Germany, that the fleet, the French fleet that was in Algeria, would join with the Italian fleet, which was a formidable force. It was not something to laugh at. The British were terrified that if these two groups got together, the Mediterranean would be unsafe for shipping. And of course, we all know even today, Britain depends on the Indian Ocean, Red Sea, Mediterranean route for a tremendous amount of its trade. There's stuff going on right now that indicates that in Yemen. So I don't know if you're familiar with the incident. I don't want to get into politics, and I don't want to get into the war deeply at all. But the British finally said to the French, look, we're going to give you three alternatives. You're going to either scuttle your fleet in Algeria, you're going to sail it to the West Indies where it will be demilitarized, or you're going to sail it to Great Britain, where many other French ships were taking refuge after the collapse of the French resistance to the German invasion. The French, in a sense, understandably said, we're not going to do any of those things. If we do that, Germany will come down on us in France like nothing you've ever seen. So the British at Mers el-Kébir simply surrounded the port and sank all but one of the capital ships. This caused immense ill will in France for the rest of the war. Some people considered the British just as bad as the Germans. That would not include me.